I have served the imperial household of Keth Salvar for 31 years. I have compiled the court registers, managed 12 successions of chamberlains, stood in 3 different throne rooms through 2 dynastic transitions, and 1 near coup that was never formally recorded. I say this not to establish my credentials, but to make plain what it means when I tell you that in 31 years I had never seen anything defeat us the way the grief of one small child did. Her name was Thesavel. She was 7 years old by the old imperial reckoning, which is perhaps 9 by yours. Her skin was the pale silver blue of her father's line, and in better times she had been a noisy, willful child, the kind the emperor had adored openly in defiance of all court protocol. He used to carry her on his shoulders through the conservatory when he thought no one was watching. I was always watching. It was my job. He died on the 42nd day of the cold season. A failure of the heart, the physicians said. He had seemed well. He had seemed, in fact, invincible, the way that people who love their children always seem until the moment they are not. He was gone between one breath and the next, and what he left behind was an empire that continued to function with eerie institutional smoothness, and one daughter who stopped speaking entirely. 40 days of silence. That is what I am here to tell you about. We brought in 3 grief healers from the Solhari Collegium, practitioners whose methods were considered the highest refinement of the art. They spent a collective 9 days with the princess. She sat through their sessions with her knees drawn to her chest and her pale eyes fixed on the middle distance, and she did not speak. The eldest healer told me, quietly on her way out, that she had never encountered anything like it. That Thesavel was not unreachable in the way some grief-shattered children become, hollow, absent, turned inward. She was present. She was listening. She simply had nothing to say to any of us. We tried her tutors. We tried the Empress Mother, who was managing her own grief with the remote dignity required of her station, and had little left over for a granddaughter's silence. We tried the children of 2 allied houses, brought in with the transparent pretense of a social visit. Thesavel sat with them in the conservatory for 2 hours, watched them play among the root beds and the climbing vines, and said nothing. She was not cruel about it. She simply was not there for them in any way that mattered. The conservatory had become her place. She spent most of her waking hours in it, sitting in the center of the main planting bed near the oldest specimens, a cluster of broadleaf trailing plants the groundskeeping staff called the founders, because they had been brought aboard the station in the first year of the palace's construction, 300 years prior. She would sit with her back against the largest of them and look up through the glass vault at the starfield beyond, and she would not speak. And we, the entire apparatus of an imperial court, the finest minds and most compassionate souls in 7 systems, could not reach her. I was standing at the conservatory's service entrance on the morning of the 41st day, when I first noticed the groundskeeper. I had, of course, been aware of the human staff in an administrative sense. Humans had been employed in non-ceremonial palace roles for some years by then: groundskeeping, technical maintenance, culinary preparation, certain classes of archival work. They were reliable and diligent and largely invisible, which was, I confess, precisely how the court thought of them. I knew this woman's name from the staffing registry, Marin Saul, 14 years of service, groundskeeper, senior grade. No formal complaints, no formal commendations. She was perhaps 45 years old by human reckoning, lean and weathered in the hands and forearms the way people are who spend years working with soil and root systems. She wore the palace groundskeeping uniform, gray coveralls, a worn leather apron, a tool roll at her hip. She came through the service entrance with a flat-bottomed carry tray and set it on the work shelf just inside the door. She did not acknowledge me. She glanced across the conservatory floor, saw the princess in her usual position against the founders, and was quiet for a moment. Then she picked up a small hand trowel and walked in. I should have stopped her. That is the honest answer. The conservatory had been informally designated a grief space for the princess by that point, and the staff had been quietly redirecting their routine work around her. But something held me in the doorway and I did not call out. Perhaps it was the way Marin Saul walked, not tiptoeing, not performing consideration. She simply walked at her ordinary pace to the far corner of the main bed, roughly 4 meters from where Thesival sat, and knelt down and began working the soil around the root base of one of the secondary founders. She did not look at the princess. She did not speak to the princess. She did what she had apparently come to do, which was remove a dense mat of root runners that had been strangling the secondary plant's base for some months, based on the look of it. She worked steadily. The sound of the trowel in the soil was small and ordinary, the kind of sound that does not demand anything. Thesival watched her for a while. I could see the child's pale eyes tracking the movement of the woman's hands. Marin did not notice, or if she noticed, she gave no sign. After perhaps 10 minutes, the princess shifted. She uncurled slightly from her position against the founder's trunk and turned to face the work more directly. She still said nothing. Marin reached into her apron pocket and brought out a small cutting, a young shoot from one of the trailing specimens, perhaps the length of a child's hand, with 3 good leaves on it. She laid it on the surface of the soil beside her and continued working. A few moments passed. Then she picked the cutting up again, considered it, and looked over at Thesival for the first time since she had entered the conservatory. She did not smile in the performed way that adults smile at grieving children, working hard to project warmth. She just looked, in the way that people look when they notice another person sitting near them and want to acknowledge the fact without making a production of it. She held up the cutting. Then she reached back into her apron and produced a small square of pale cloth, the kind used for polishing lens work, and she placed the cutting in the center of it. She folded the cloth over the cutting carefully, pressing it flat with both palms. She did this deliberately so that the process was visible. Then she opened the cloth and the cutting was pressed inside, the shape of its leaves held in the fabric. She closed it again and set it on the soil between herself and the princess. Thesival looked at the folded cloth for a long moment. Then she leaned forward, crossed the 4 meters of soil between them on her hands and knees, and picked it up. She opened it, she looked at the pressed cutting inside, she looked at Marin. Marin reached into her apron pocket and produced a second cutting. She set it on the soil in front of the princess, and nodded at the cloth in Thesival's hands. The princess looked down. She placed the cutting on the cloth. She pressed it flat, carefully with both her small pale palms the way she had watched Marin do it. She opened it. She looked. "It keeps the shape," she said. Her voice was hoarse from 40 days of disuse. Those 4 words were the whole of it. But in 31 years, I had never heard anything that sounded more like relief. Marin looked at the pressed cutting in the cloth. "It does," she said. "My grandmother showed me. She said it's the only way to keep something after it's already gone." That was all. Marin turned back to her root bed. The princess sat in the soil beside her, pressing leaves into the cloth, one after another, quietly. I stood in the doorway and did not move for a very long time. The Empress Mother's chamberlain came to me the following morning with an imperial citation prepared, the Order of the Conservatory, a distinction typically given to senior courtiers. I brought it to Marin Saul myself, because it seemed right to do it personally. She read it over. She folded it once and handed it back. "I appreciate it," she said, "but I didn't do anything, I was just working." She picked up her trowel and went back to the root bed. I stood there for a moment with the folded citation in my hands, and I thought about what it means when the thing that reaches a person is not an art or a method or a skill, but only a pair of ordinary hands moving in the soil, and the particular quiet of someone who asks nothing. I filed the citation. I noted in the staffing registry that Marin Saul had provided exceptional service to the imperial household on the 41st day. Then I went back to my work, which is what she had already done.